My name is Stephanie Grant, and I am an assistant professor in the Department of Literature, and I am thrilled to be here, thrilled to be introducing Claudia Rankine, and delighted to see so many of you. This evening is made possible by a collaboration between the Department of Literature, the Humanities Lab, and the lovely and fabulous Despina Kakudaki, who runs the Humanities Lab, the Dean of Students, Mary Clark, and the MFA program's Visiting Writer Series. All of those folks got together to make this reading happen. So let's get started. Words work as release, well-oiled doors opening and closing between intention, gesture. So begins part 5 of Claudia Rankine's shattering new collection of poems, Citizen, in American Lyric. I say shattering because this collection, Rankine's 5th, shatters form, shatters our expectations of what a poetry book is and what it can do. Citizen is at once a collection of mostly prose poems, whose subtitle, in American Lyric, underscores their lyricism. And it is a poetry collection that deploys arresting visuals by contemporary artists to beg another kind of engagement from its readers. And it is a collection that includes a searing essay on the tennis star Serena Williams and the discrimination she has suffered in the course of her astonishing career. And it is a poetry collection that features scripts for situation videos, which in another day might have been called art films, several of which have been produced by Rankine and her collaborator, John Lucas. If you haven't seen the situation videos, I suggest you go straight home after the reading and find them on her website. They are an astonishing extension of the book that you are holding in your hands. And if you're not holding the book in your hands, you may purchase a book after the reading. The AU bookstore has them here for sale, as well as some of her other collections. So Citizen is a book that shatters our expectations, but it's also a book that shatters us, her readers, American citizens and citizens of the world who come to this collection to encounter ourselves, and to encounter what perhaps our citizenship means in the year 2015. Yesterday, here in the literature department, we spent an entire day, our fall colloquium, discussing this book and the ways it revealed us, the ways it read us. We talked about the book's documentary aspects, how it chronicles state violence against Black men. We discussed its lyrical aspects, the way it finds aesthetic value, by which I mean beauty, shocking beauty, in anger and resistance, and even in fatigue. We discussed the collection's main argument, paltry word argument, insufficient, and again, a word we do not associate with poetry. Let's say then that we discuss the book's intervention, its brilliant and timely insight about how microaggressions, small social interactions in which white Americans failed to see or missee Black Americans. Rankine connects these small mishaps. "Oh my God, I didn't see you," says a man who cuts in front of the speaker standing in line at the drugstore in one of the poems. "I really didn't see you." She connects these quotidian slights. Who among us hasn't committed them? These she connects to state violence, to the not seeing, the dangerous and deadly misseeing of Black men by police officers across the country. We in the literature department were aware, as we gathered yesterday to discuss Citizen, that we were part of a national conversation about microaggressions and about state violence, and that we were part, too, of a national conversation about poetry, about art, and what it can do. Behind me is a picture of a woman, a citizen activist. Her name we know now is Johari Oseyi Adusuyi, who read Citizen quite pointedly at a Donald Trump rally and who refused to stop reading it when she was asked to do so. The book's cover clearly recognizable to television viewers, which is to say, the book has, in its brief life, gained an iconic status in this national conversation. So from Citizen, we learn that art can incite conversation, it can bear witness to actions of individuals and states, it can give voice and space to feelings that many of us do not want to feel. There is a clear connection here between rage and grief. I would say that the collection verges on the elegiac. It is so full of our losses. But I will stop short of elegy, as elegy implies acceptance. Acceptance of grief, acceptance of loss, acceptance of the world as it is. And this Rankine refuses to do. Instead, Citizen incites feeling and refuses numbness, and insists on the moment in which we find ourselves, the terrible and beautiful moment. Please join me in welcoming Claudia Rankine.
Good evening. This is so nice to see you. We've been putting it off, but I'm glad we finally made it. So tonight, I'd like to thank Stephanie Grant for that lovely introduction and everybody who was involved in getting me here. I was trying to think of a good organizational way to do this reading. So I think what I'll do is read the pieces that precede the images. And then we can talk about the images a little bit. Some of you might know Citizen was put together by having conversations. I asked a community of friends different questions, and the questions led to the pieces. And then some of it came from remembering. Hobbes talks about how the imagination is no different from the memory. That the imagination is a decayed sense, and that decayed sense is actually a memory. So I'm going to start with a memory. When you're alone and too tired even to turn on any of your devices, you let yourself linger in a past stacked among your pillows. Usually you are nestled under blankets and the house is empty. Sometimes the moon is missing. And beyond the windows, the low gray ceiling seems approachable. Its dark light dims in degrees, depending on the density of clouds, and you fall back into that which gets reconstructed as metaphor. The root is often associative. You smell good. You were 12 attending St. Philip and James School on White Plains Road, and the girl sitting in the seat behind asks you to lean to the right during exams so she can copy what you have written. Sister Evelyn is in the habit of taping the hundreds and the failing grades to the coat closet doors. The girl is Catholic with waist-length brown hair. You can't remember her name. Mary, Catherine. You never really speak except for the time she makes her requests, and later when she tells you, you smell good and have features more like a white person. You assume she thinks she is thanking you for letting her cheat and feels better cheating from an almost white person. Sister Evelyn never figures out your arrangement, perhaps because you never turn around to copy Mary Catherine's answers. Sister Evelyn must think, these two girls think a lot alike. Or she cares less about cheating and more about humiliation. Or she never actually saw you sitting there. So now I'm going to leave Mr. Trump to his shenanigans and move. I'm going to get back to the opening image, but first I'm going to move here. This piece that I read is followed in the book by this photograph. It's a photograph by the photographer Michael David Murphy. And you all could buy a house on Jim Crow Road because it actually exists in Flowery Branch, Georgia. When I first came into, and when I first saw this photograph, I said to Michael, "Did you Photoshop this?" And he said, "No, you can go there. You can go to that street." And I said, "Why is it called Jim Crow Road?" And he said, "I asked them, and they said it was named after James Crow." And so, and so he asked them, "Then why not name the street James Crow?" And he said, "But we call him Jim." One of the things, though, that I'm really interested in terms of Michael David Murphy's photography is that, like this book, he has in his body of work something he calls the unphotographable. So when he sees a moment in the landscape that he hasn't captured with his camera, he then writes a description of it and puts that in the frame. So it's sort of using language in his photographic practice in the way that I use image in my writing practice. In asking people to talk about moments where an ordinary interaction led to a comment that threw them out, you having an encounter with a colleague or a friend or just somebody out in the world, and suddenly something gets said to you that throws you out of the encounter and places you in the position of the other. So when I ask people to tell me these stories, the stories where they thought they were just hanging out at work or anywhere, and somebody says something specifically in the realm of anti-Black racism, many of my friends said, I don't remember anything. And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, I don't. But then a day later, the phone would ring. And not only would they remember one thing, they would get more and more irritated as they told story after story after story. So here's one example. You're in the dark, in the car, watching the black tarred street being swallowed by speed. He tells you his dean is making him hire a person of color when there are so many great writers out there. You think maybe this is an experiment and you are being tested or retroactively insulted, or you have done something that communicates this is an okay conversation to be having. Why do you feel comfortable saying this to me? You wish the light would turn red or a police siren would go off so you could slam on the brakes, slam into the car ahead of you, fly forward so quickly both your faces would suddenly be exposed to the wind. As usual, you drive straight through the moment with the expected backing off of what was previously said. It is not only that confrontation is headache-producing, it is also that you have a destination that doesn't include acting like this moment isn't inhabitable, hasn't happened before, and the before isn't part of the now, as the night darkens and the time shortens between where we are and where we are going. That moment didn't belong to me, but as I was working on it, I was reminded that I was hired at Columbia at Barnard in the Women's College, and in the first month of teaching there, a poet invited me out to lunch, and I thought that was very nice, and so I went. And as we were sitting there, she said, I don't know if you know this, but the job that you have is really my job. But they needed to hire a person of color. And I was like, oh, interesting. And so that happened, and this is, a long time ago, since I've been teaching, for 20 years. And then recently this year, a few months ago, I was giving a reading, and I read the piece I just read. And then I went to dinner, and I was sitting next to that woman. And she said to me, that piece you read about the, hiring a person of color, I think I've said something like that in my life. And I said, you have, to me. In fact. And I don't know, I was like, is this an opening or what exactly is going on? I don't know. You and your partner go to see the film, The House We Live In. You ask a friend to pick up your child from school. On your way home, your phone rings. Your neighbor tells you he is standing at his window watching a menacing black guy casing both your homes. The guy is walking back and forth, talking to himself, and seems disturbed. You tell your neighbor that your friend, whom he has met, is babysitting. He says, no, it's not him. He's met your friend, and this isn't that nice young man. Anyway, he wants you to know, he's called the police. Your partner calls your friend and asks him if there's a guy walking back and forth in front of your home. Your friend says that if anyone were outside, he would see him because he is standing outside. You hear the sirens through the speakerphone. Your friend is speaking to your neighbor when you arrive home. The 4 police cars are gone. Your neighbor has apologized to your friend and is now apologizing to you. Feeling somewhat responsible for the actions of your neighbor, you clumsily tell your friend that the next time he wants to talk on the phone, he should just go in the backyard. He looks at you a long minute before saying he can speak on the phone wherever he wants. Yes, of course, you say. Yes, of course. So that brilliant move was mine. But in my defense, I have to tell you that we were in the car on the 10, and we heard all of these sirens. And then the phone was turned off. So by the time I got home, I was thinking, oh my God, he's dead. Something has happened. And so, but it was a good teaching moment for me because, even in the middle of my anxiety, I should not feel that to protect his body, I need to limit his rights. Which was, that thing of like, I want to hide you away so that you won't be hurt by a system that can't see you. So I was glad he called me on that. And what was sort of sad about that moment also was I had anticipated it, I had thought about it, I had seen it coming. And that's why I had the dinner party where I invited my neighbor to meet my black male friend, because I thought he's going to be in and out of our house, and we're the only black family or mixed race family on the street, so let them know. But because it's about a racial imagination inside the body of whiteness that really is not attached to individual people, but to a history of systemic white supremacist thinking, it didn't really matter, that gesture. So it was never that nice young man that he met over dinner. it was always the black body tied to criminality that was encroaching on his right to live. The only, a lot of people told me stories, and when they told me the story, I almost always had an analogous story. They would tell me that story, and I would think, oh yeah, I remember when this happened to me. But there was one story that was told to me by a friend who teaches in Northern California, and I really was like, no way. And she was like, wait. So, the new therapist specializes in trauma counseling. You have only ever spoken on the phone. Her house has a side gate that leads to a back entrance she uses for patients. You walk down a path bordered on both sides with deer grass and rosemary to the gate, which turns out to be locked. At the front door, the bell is a small round disc that you press firmly. When the door finally opens, the woman standing there yells at the top of her lungs, "Get away from my house! What are you doing in my yard?" It's as if a wounded Doberman Pinscher or a German Shepherd has gained the power of speech. And though you back up a few steps, you manage to tell her you have an appointment. You have an appointment, she spits back. Then she pauses. Everything pauses. "Oh," she says, followed by, "Oh yes, that's right, I'm sorry. I am so, so sorry." I asked my friend what happened next. I'm trying to get this to move. There it is. And she said that she went home and she wept. And then she wrote a letter to the therapist saying she wasn't coming back. And I said, "Oh, you made another appointment?" And she said, "Yeah." And I completely understand how that works. Like, you go into the moment, and the moment has its trajectory, right? And it would take a lot of energy to redirect that moment. And so the fact that she went through the appointment, made another appointment, feels to me actually how it works, unless you can somehow garner the energy to redirect in that moment. That's something I've been trying to train myself to do, to kind of groove into disruption in the moments that take away my own humanity. It's like, let's not be one with that, and let the lack of continuance actually feel like the more normal thing, rather than getting on the same page with that kind of incoherence. That piece is followed by this image on my right, and it's an image done by the artist, the sculptor Kate Clark, and she basically is a taxidermist. She buys hides and stuffs them, and then she casts face, and you could get one made of you if you'd like. And does that. The reason I wanted to put this piece in conversation with that therapist piece was the idea of people thinking about Black people as animals. I mean, we have the famous Howard Cosell moment. I mean, maybe not all of us remember it, but some of us might, where he's watching a football game and he says, "See that monkey run." And so I thought, what would it be like if we actually, instead of running away from the category of the animalistic Black body, if we decided we would walk into that and choose our own animal, choose an animal that is hunted. And so when I was thinking that, I remembered seeing this a long time ago. And so I tracked down Kate and I said, "Kate, can I have this?" or can I buy the rights to it? You know, nothing is free. And she said, well, can I read the book before I answer you? And so I sent it to her. And she said, well, why don't we make a piece specifically for the book? So she made that. And it took months, and, you know, we picked the hide. And then I went to her studio, and she said, here it is. And I was like, I don't want that. And partly because I think Kate is white, and I think her idea was, I'm going to make something that looks proud and beautiful in the face of all this violence. And in fact, what I loved was the affect on the face of this, the kind of wounded, suspicious-looking composure of even the way the body is positioned. The caribou body is positioned in this one without the majestic horns. And so I went back to the original, much to her distress. So inside this book of poetry, I say it in that way because people say it in that way. It's a big question. What is this book? Is an essay about Serena Williams. So I'll read a little bit from that. What does a victorious or defeated black woman's body in a historically white space look like? Serena and her big sister Venus Williams brought to mind Zora Neale Hurston's I feel most colored when I'm thrown against a sharp white background. This appropriated line stenciled on canvas by Glenn Ligon, who used plastic letter stencils, smudging oil sticks, and graphite to transform the words into abstractions, seemed to be ad copy for some aspect of life for all black bodies. Euston's statement has been played out in the big screen by Serena and Venus. They win sometimes, they lose sometimes, they've been injured, they've been happy, they've been sad, booed mightily, see Indian Wells. They've been cheered, and through it all, and evident to all, were those people who were enraged that they're there at all. Graphite against a sharp white background. For years, you attribute to Serena Williams a kind of resilience appropriate only to those who exist in celluloid. Neither her father, nor her mother, nor her sister, nor Jehovah her God, nor Nike Camp could shield her ultimately from people who felt her black body didn't belong on their court, in their world. From the start, many made it clear Serena would have done better struggling to survive in the two-dimensionality of a Millet painting, rather than on their tennis court. Better to put all that strength to work in their fantasy of her working the land, rather than be caught up in the turbulence of our ancient drama, like a ship fighting a storm in a Turner seascape. That essay, this is Jason Massoon, the artist, but I want to look at this piece. Inside the essay is the piece on the right by the artist Nick Cave. And Nick Cave, I had seen his work a long time ago, and I thought, why is he doing that? He makes these things called sound suits, and they cover you from head to foot. And then I found this description by him, and I'm going to read it to you, or I'll skip around a bit, of how he came to make these sound suits. He says, I was in a park, and I was thinking about, well, you know, I'm a black male. I know what it's like to feel discarded, dismissed, devalued. You know, the moment I leave my house, I could be a victim of circumstances. You just never know. So I'm sitting in the park and I looked down and I saw a twig, something that I walk on, something that I dismiss. And I just thought, it just sort of clicked. While meditating on the media portrayal of Rodney King, because it turns out that he started making these suits after the beating of Rodney King in 1992. So he's seen the video of Rodney King, and he's sitting in this park thinking about it. And he says, while meditating on the media portrayal of King, larger than life, 10 policemen to bring him down, what does that look like in my head? And it ended up looking like a suit made of twigs, drilled holes into the delicate tree parts to create a massive objects. But I didn't think I could put it on my body. And then once I stepped into it, I thought about building this sort of second skin, you know, a suit of armor, something for protection purposes. Then I started thinking about protests. In order to be heard, you've got to be aggressive, speak louder. You have got to make sound. Hence, the name sound suits. So that's how these began. They began as a moment of trying to address the vulnerability he felt inside his own body. So he made these sound suits, and the one on the right is the one that is used in the book. That's just another example. But initially, with the twig ones, they actually made sounds when you put them on and moved around in them. The other piece that's inside the essay is this image of Caroline Wozniacki. She's a Danish tennis player, a good friend of Serena's. And she did this, and then the media said, "Is this racist?" And Wozniacki was sort of surprised. She's like, "What do you mean? What do you mean? I don't mean to be racist." But I don't know for sure, but I don't think she understood the ways in which she was stepping into the lineage of the black body and the Venus Hottentot image on display. You know, never mind mimicking the body of Serena Williams. So those images are inside the Serena Williams essay. I'm keeping an eye on the clock. All right, so I'm going to jump forward. So I'm going to skip a lot of images here and go here. My brothers are notorious. They have not been to prison. They have been imprisoned. The prison is not a place you enter. It is no place. My brothers are notorious. They do regular things like wait. On my birthday, they say my name. They will never forget that we are named. What is that memory? The days of our childhood together were steep steps into a collapsing mind. It looked like we rescued ourselves, were rescued. Then there are these days, each day of our adult lives. They will never forget our way through these brothers, each brother, my dearest brothers, dear heart. Your hearts are broken. This is not a secret, though there are secrets, and as yet I do not understand how my own sorrow has turned into my brothers' hearts. The hearts of my brothers are broken. If I knew another way to be, I would call up a brother. I would hear myself saying, my brother, my dearest brothers, dear heart. On the tip of a tongue, one note following another is another path, another dawn, where the pink sky is the bloodshot of struck, of sleepless, of sorry, of senseless. Shush. Those years of and before me and my brothers, the years of passage, plantation, migration, of Jim Crow segregation, of poverty, inner cities, profiling, of 1 in 3, 2 jobs, boy, hey boy, each a felony. Accumulate into the hours inside our lives where we are all caught hanging. The rope inside us, the tree inside us, its roots, our limbs, the throat sliced through, and when we open our mouth to speak, blossoms, oh blossoms, no place coming out. Brother, dear brother, that kind of blue. The sky is the silence of brothers all the days leading up to my call. If I called, I'd say goodbye before I broke the goodbye. I say goodbye before anyone can hang up. Don't hang up. My brother hangs up, though he's there. I keep talking, the talk keeps him there. The sky is blue, kind of blue. The day is hot. Are you cold? It does get cool. Is it cool? Are you cool? My brother is completed by sky. The sky is a silence. Eventually he says, it is raining down. It was raining, it stopped raining. It is raining down. He won't hang up. He's there, but he's hung up, though he's there. Goodbye, I say. I break the goodbye. I say goodbye before anyone can hang up. Don't hang up. Wait with me. Wait with me, though the waiting might be the call of goodbyes. So this was the most difficult image to get in the book. Because when I called up Getty, and I said, I would like to buy the rights for this. They said, no, you can't. And, you have that moment where you're like, what? What do you mean I can't? And they were like, no, you can't. You cannot buy it. I'm like, but it's on your website. It says I can buy it. And they said no. So I did the first thing, which is you hang up the phone and you think, okay, I'll call back tomorrow and I'll talk to somebody else. And so that's what I did. I hung up the phone, I called back tomorrow, and the person said, no, you can't, again. And I was like, what? And they said, no, you can't buy it. And I said, why not? Why can't I buy it? And they said, well, we are just the in-between person in front of Hilton Archives, and they don't want the image sold because they're afraid it's going to be used to promote what's in the image. At which point I was heartened because I thought, oh, I'm not a white supremacist. So finally, something I can do. So I said to them, what if I sent you the book and you sent it to them? And so that's what happened. I sent them the book, they sent it to them, and then they said yes. And you might remember this is the 1930 lynching of Thomas Shipp and Abram Smith in Merriam, Indiana. Then once I waited till I paid for the rights to the image, and then I called them back. I said, there was one other thing. They're like, yes. And I said, well, I want to Photoshop out the men. And I thought this was going to be another go around, and they were like, oh, sure, go ahead. Partly because for them, that's the site of anxiety, right? And with that gone, for them, I think that the image was less problematic. But I was always interested in this, in the white bodies demonstrating complicity that is a dynamic, I think, that has stayed as a part of the culture, and we don't talk about it because we get distracted by the scandal of the overt racist act without thinking about our day-to-day complicity around these moments. And smaller moments that lead to these moments. So for me, it was very important to point to those faces, to point to the fact that racism is not an element of the past. It's with us, and it's with us because many people are in tune and allow those things to happen. My husband is white, and it's interesting to me how many things have been disrupted because he is assumed to be complicit inside the moment, the anti-black racist moment, or any kind of demonstration of racism. So for example, he was invited to a Super Bowl party in my town. I live in a college town in California. And he went. It was the husband of a good friend, a person I play tennis with, and he wanted to have the guys over, and And so my husband went, and while the Super Bowl, whatever they're doing, was playing, the football people, running around, suddenly one of the guests said something like, what's up with that stupid nigger? So then my husband, of course, was like, what? And the host knew, obviously, that John was married to me. And so suddenly the whole party derailed because John was like, I'm out of here, and how dare you, and blah, blah, blah. And what was sort of amusing to me was afterwards, I got an apology from the wife. And there were lots of apologies. And inside the apology was the fact that we don't know that guy so well. And I'm just like, that's neither here nor there. Had John not been in the room, would the room have held that moment and allowed that moment to be part of the dynamic of that party? And I think that's one of the places where those people and we all reside. Like, what is our complicity around these moments? What are we allowing to float in the air, whether or not a person of color is in the room? Okay, so I'm going to read two more pieces. I spoke to a lot of black men when I was working on this book, and one of the questions I asked them was to describe to me what it felt like to be pulled over by the police. And so I have a lot of black male friends, and they all had police stories. But I have a friend who lives in California, and he's a lawyer. And his kids and my kid play together. And so if you met this guy, he's the quietest, he's used to just figuring things out in terms of legal stuff. But he's not a big, gregarious kind of guy. He's very quiet, and he has a very sly sense of humor. So he wouldn't be the first person you expect to speak up. And so I said to him, what about you? What about your stories with the police? And he said, I'll tell you someday. And I said, no, you come over, I'll make you dinner, you tell me. So he came over, and I made him dinner, as promised. I live up to my word. And he started telling me these stories. And they were one after the other, after the other, after the other. And suddenly, this person who I have known for a decade started exhibiting a level of irritation and anger and sadness that I didn't know was possible inside his body. But this piece that I'm going to read came from different pieces that he encounters. I made them all into one long piece. I knew whatever was in front of me was happening, and then the police vehicle came to a screeching halt in front of me like they were setting up a blockade. Everywhere were flashes, a siren sounding, and a stretched out roar. Get on the ground now. Then I just knew. And you're not the guy, and you fit the description, because there is only one guy who is always the guy fitting the description. I left my client's house knowing I would be pulled over. I just knew. I opened my briefcase on the passenger seat just so they could see. Yes, officer rolled around on my tongue, which grew out of a bell that could never ring, because its emergency was a tolling I was meant to swallow. In a landscape drawn from an ocean bed, you can't drive yourself sane. So angry you are crying, you can't drive yourself sane. This motion wears a guy out. Our motion is wearing you out, and still you're not that guy. Then flashes a siren, a stretched out roar, and you're not the guy, and still you fit the description, because there is only one guy who is always the guy fitting the description. Get on the ground now. I must have been speeding. No, you weren't speeding. I wasn't speeding? You didn't do anything wrong. Then why are you pulling me over? Why am I pulled over? Put your hands where they can be seen. Put your hands in the air. Put your hands up. Then you are stretched out on the hood, then cuffed. Get on the ground now. Each time it begins in the same way, it doesn't begin the same way. Each time it begins, it's the same. Flashes, a siren, the stretched out roar. Maybe because home was a hood the officer could not afford, not that a reason was needed. I was pulled out of my vehicle a block from my door, handcuffed and pushed into the police vehicle's back seat. The officer's knee pressing into my collarbone, the officer's warm breath vacating a face, creased into the smile of its own private joke. Each time it begins in the same way, it doesn't begin the same way. Each time it begins, it's the same. Go ahead and hit me, motherfucker, fled my lips. And the officer did not need to hit me. The officer did not need anything from me, except the look on my face on the drive across town. You can't drive yourself sane. You're not insane. Our motion is wearing you out. You're not the guy. This is what it looks like. You know this is wrong. This is not what it looks like. You need to be quiet. This is wrong. You need to close your mouth now. This is what it looks like. Why are you talking if you haven't done anything wrong? And you're not the guy. And still you fit the description, because there is only one guy who's always the guy fitting the description. In a landscape drawn from an ocean bed, you can't drive yourself sane. So angry, you can't drive yourself sane. The charge the officer decided on was exhibition of speed. I was told after the fingerprinting to stand naked. I stood naked. It was only then I was instructed to dress, to leave, to walk all those miles back home. And still, you're not the guy. And still, you fit the description. Because there is only one guy who is always the guy fitting the description. I said to him, why'd you walk home? Why didn't you call somebody? And he said, I was just so angry. I needed to walk it off. And they really did make him take off all his clothes. I don't know what that has to do with a speeding ticket, but... All right, so my final piece, the hardest thing was ending this book. How do you end the book? What do you do? How do you suggest that the thing is unending? I couldn't figure it out. And then I went to my club, the Claremont Club, and which I have a discounted membership fee because I'm associated with a university, I want to say that. And I'm early to the tennis, and I'm sitting in my car. I'm waiting because I'm about 20 minutes early. And I'm thinking about the ending of the book. I'm like, how am I going to end the book? And as I'm sitting there thinking about this, a woman, a white woman, drives her car into the opposing spot. So she drives in, she parks, she turns off the car, and she looks up, and she sees me looking at her, and we lock our gaze. And then she looks away, and she turns on the car, and she backs up. And she goes and parks on the other side of the lot. So I'm thinking, okay, this is a moment. I will ask her why she just did that. I'm going to do it. So I jump out of my car and I start running across the lot. Not thinking, what is this woman going to do now? You know, like, oh my God, here she comes. But then as I start running, I realize, whoops, I forgot my racket and I'm going to be late to tennis. So then I'm in that moment like, do I continue on this journey to confront the lady, or do I go get my racket and go to my appointment? I can hear the even breathing that creates passages to dreams. And yes, I want to interrupt to tell him, her, us, you, me, I don't know how to end what doesn't have an ending. Tell me a story, he says, wrapping his arms around me. Yesterday, I was waiting in the car for time to pass. A woman pulled in and started to park her car facing mine. Our eyes met, and what passed as quickly as the look away. She backed up and parked on the other side of the lot. I could have followed her to worry my question, but I had to go. I was expected on court. I grabbed my racket. The sunrise is slow and cloudy, dragging the light in, but barely. Did you win? He asked. It wasn't a match, I say. It was a lesson. Thank you so much. Thank you. I have consented to answer some questions, if you have those on order. Hi. That's a good question. I think partly because the dynamic is a dynamic that we can all step into, and specifically the section that deals with Katrina, deals with Trayvon Martin, those I think are specific to anti-Black racism. But the dynamics around microaggressions, I think, open themselves out to all people of color. I've had many Asian women come up to me and say, it's as if I'm reading my life. I've had many Hispanic women come up to me and say, it's as if I'm reading. So I think those moments, we're really talking about a power dynamic where whiteness, part of the privilege of whiteness is that it can create a segregated life in this world and hold on to that and actually actively push others out. And that others include Black people, but not only Black people. But the moments that specifically address historical events, happenings, egregious ones in our culture tend many times to have housed themselves in Black communities. And we see that in terms of the rate of incarceration for Black men in this country. We see that in moments like what happened in Florida during the elections, what happened in Katrina. So it's true that the book resides in anti-Black racism, but I think the dynamic opens out to people of color. Well, I think, it's complicated. It's a complicated dynamic, and I think that's why hate speech is different from free speech. That's why there's a category for that. I think when you start threatening the lives of people, you have somehow stepped out of the privilege of free speech, which has happened, which is what I think has caused some of the kerfuffle. I mean, the initial thing about the Halloween costumes, that was an interesting space in terms of determining what language is appropriate, what gestures are appropriate to keep people feeling comfortable. And that's always going to be a contested space, yeah? And we saw this already with Just Read Charlie. I mean, obviously, when you start killing people, you've overstepped. But then there's another conversation about what was done in the name of those cartoons, whose rights were being stepped on. And I don't think that the one discussion disallows the other opinion, that you don't go around killing people. So the two things, I think, can coexist. But I think as a culture, we have a hard time holding complex positions. We're also ready to take a position fully. And in the name of being right, like sometimes it is complex. And sometimes it has a history pushing forward a position that is not as simple as it seems. So I know that's not an answer. But it's a complicated situation. So the question is, why? Yeah, somebody asked me that earlier. Linda Boris, Professor Boris asked me that earlier today. The prose poem for me allows voice in a way that the Linead poems doesn't. And for me, working inside the sentence, being able to both bring forward the narrative and the voice, is crucial in terms of my own need to hold on to the history in certain ways and hold on to a kind of day-to-dayness in a certain way. Which is not to say that there aren't poets who are able to do both, but I know my limits. And for me, I have found that the traditional lyric, when I work in that space, I tend to want to work more internally. But inside the prose poem, I can bring forward a narrative that allows me all of the tools of poetry in terms of alliteration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but also gives me the sentence in terms of the building of story and the utilization of voice in a way that serves my subject. Ah, the cover image. I can go back with my clicker. So this image is an image by David Hammonds. He's a conceptual artist. He started in LA, lives in New York right now. It's called In the Hood, done in 1993. Another image that came, though Hammonds wouldn't say it came out of the Rodney King, it certainly came a year later, so seemed to be in discourse with the Rodney King moment, much like Nick Cave's Sound Suits. And what I loved about the image as a cover image is its mutability. It's both holding the space of the discriminated body as well as the discriminator, you know, so that it is both the regularness of the everyday hoodie turned into a kind of trophy on the wall. It's the hood of the KKK. It's in the hood in terms of neighborhoods. It's the neighborhoods that make up our country. You know, so all of these things are happening with this chopped off hoodie, this chopped off champion hoodie. And even the way it is sitting became a kind of emblem to me of the disassociated body, implied, not implied, and that struggle to inhabit the space of the body. So that's how we ended with this. Oddly enough, it wasn't the original image. The original image was a photo of Serena Williams, and luckily I couldn't get the rights to it. There was somebody all the way in the back. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I know that when they told me their stories, they knew they were telling me their stories for the book, yeah? And I was in New York recently, though, and a friend of mine said to me, a friend of hers called her up and said, "Do you know this woman named Claudia Rankine?" And she said, "Yeah." And she said, "Because, you know, I read some book called Citizen, and in it, there's a story very like something that happened to you." And she was like, "Really?" So that's the only time that a person has come back to recall that. But I in the writing of the pieces, I was always very let's say the person who told me the story stayed in the room with me long after. So in working on those pieces, I really was wary about putting words in their mouth or thoughts in their head. So you can sort of tell which ones I'm in because they're longer. The ones that happen quickly because I knew that those people were alive and kicking in the world, and I didn't want them to feel that I had appropriated and embellished what they told me. So the trick really was to find the most transparent way to communicate what they had told me. If they're longer and embellished, it's because maybe the person was a close friend of mine and they did talk a lot about how it felt or what they were feeling like in the moment of the encounter. But otherwise, I pretty much tried to get the encounter in and leave the speculation out. And then one more question, and then we'll call it a night. So the question is, did everyone hear that? So the question is, why the sigh, the use of the sigh inside of Citizen? I needed a gesture that externalized the activity of taking all of this stuff in. Like how, if you had one gesture, one sound, one thing that you did that accounted for the day-to-dayness of having to absorb the annihilation and recoup the self, what would that thing be? And so that's how I ended up at the sigh. That the sigh for me became a gesture of weariness. It's not a yawn, but it is still a sigh of weariness. It's a sigh that both recognizes the accumulative aspect of having to carry this stuff around with you. And it's also a gesture of release. You know, it's the same, but inside the rhetoric of get over it, move on. What's wrong with you? It's just words. Grow up. And so, you know, in watching tennis too, it's really interesting to watch those guys out there those guys and women out there on the tennis court, because you can watch them metabolize their frustrations and have to then re-engage with the match. And so that also became a kind of playbook for what it is to move through the day. And you sigh. You know. So that's how I landed there. Thank you so much.